Emily and Zachary Monroe were the picture-perfect newlyweds, young, beautiful, and deeply in love, when they vanished without a trace during their luxury honeymoon on a remote island paradise. What began as a dream getaway quickly unraveled into a chilling true crime mystery that would shock the world, reveal the darkness hiding behind palm trees and sunsets, and expose the twisted mind of a predator who had been watching them from the shadows all along. Emily and Zachary Monroe had the kind of love story that people envied. Both in their late 20s, they met during a summer volunteer program in Charleston, South Carolina. Emily was a kindergarten teacher with a warm smile and a love for children. Zachary worked in real estate, driven and ambitious, but known for his charm and humor. Their relationship blossomed quickly. Friends described them as inseparable, the type of couple who could finish each other's sentences and make even mundane moments feel magical. After 3 years together, Zachary proposed during a quiet weekend in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Emily said yes through tears of joy, and within a year they were planning a wedding. Their wedding was elegant and intimate, held in a historic southern estate surrounded by oak trees draped in Spanish moss. White roses lined the aisle. Soft music played as Emily walked down in a lace gown, glowing with happiness. Everyone who attended remembered it as one of the most beautiful weddings they'd ever seen. But what excited the couple most wasn't the ceremony. It was the adventure waiting afterward. For their honeymoon, they chose Isla Paraíso, a small and exclusive Caribbean island few people had even heard of. Accessible only by private charter, the island was marketed as a hidden gem, unspoiled, private, and perfect for couples looking to escape the world. Emily had always dreamed of turquoise waters and quiet beaches, while Zachary was excited by the idea of being unplugged, away from city life. They booked a week at a luxurious cliffside villa, one of only a handful on the island. Each villa came with its own plunge pool, private chef, and stunning views of the ocean. No roads, no cars, no tourists, just nature, peace, and each other. From the moment they arrived, everything seemed perfect. Their first day was spent sipping cocktails under palm trees, taking sunset photos, and swimming in the warm sea. Emily posted pictures online, a close-up of her wedding ring glinting against a wine glass, Zachary smiling in the background. The comments flooded in. Everyone admired their glow, their joy. Even in a short time, they made an impression on the few locals and staff who interacted with them. They were polite, cheerful, and clearly in love. They took jungle hikes, guided by maps given at check-in. They dined on fresh seafood cooked by their villa's private chef. On the third day, they kayaked along the cliffs, exploring hidden coves and stopping to swim in a secluded lagoon. Emily collected shells while Zachary flew his drone to capture footage of the ocean. Every night, they returned to their villa to eat by candlelight, relax in the pool, and stargaze from their balcony. But behind the beauty of the island was an element they didn't see. The villa's remote location meant it was far from other guests, nestled between dense jungle on one side and steep cliffs on the other. There were no security cameras, no streetlights. Cell service was limited. Staff only visited once per day to deliver meals or supplies, and guests were encouraged to stay disconnected. On the fourth night, the last photos Emily posted were of a bonfire they had built on the beach using driftwood. Her caption read, "Heaven on earth with my favorite person." The photo showed both of them laughing, arms around each other, the fire glowing behind them. It received hundreds of likes in just a few hours. No one realized it would be the last photo they'd ever take. By the next morning, everything changed. Their phones went dark, messages went unread, Calls went unanswered. Emily's mother, who had been in touch daily since the wedding, began to panic. She reached out to the resort staff, asking them to check in on the couple. When the villa was entered later that day, it looked strangely undisturbed. Breakfast sat cold on the terrace table. A single coffee cup was overturned. Their luggage was still unpacked. The bed was unmade, and both phones were inside. Emily's passport was untouched, locked in the safe with the couple's return tickets. It didn't look like they had packed. It didn't look like they had left. It looked like they had vanished. What began as the perfect honeymoon had suddenly turned into something unexplainable. And on Isla Paraíso, paradise was about to become the center of a nightmare. The first sign that something was wrong came on a quiet Sunday morning. Emily's mother, Karen, had grown anxious after not receiving her usual morning message from her daughter. Emily had made it a habit to send daily updates since the wedding, photos, short videos, or even just a good morning text. But that Sunday, her phone stayed silent. At first, Karen brushed it off, assuming the couple might have been off exploring or caught in a zone without cell service. But as the hours passed with no word, her worry deepened. By Monday morning, Karen had called the resort's concierge multiple times. At her insistence, a staff member was sent to check the Monroe's villa. It was nestled far up on the cliffs, surrounded by dense foliage, and accessed only by a winding path. When the employee arrived, he immediately felt something was off. The front door was closed, but unlocked. The villa was quiet, eerily so. Breakfast had been delivered earlier that morning, but the tray from the previous day was still sitting outside, half-eaten. The inside of the villa was untouched. The bed was unmade, clothes were folded in drawers, and toiletries remained in the bathroom. Zachary's shoes were by the front door. Emily's straw hat lay on a lounge chair by the pool. Neither of their phones had been taken. Their passports and wallets were still inside the room's locked safe. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible struggle. Yet there was a strange stillness, a sense that something had interrupted them mid-morning, mid-life. Within hours, local authorities were alerted. The island ES police force was small, mostly tasked with handling minor tourist issues or the occasional missing item. A full-scale disappearance was rare. They began interviewing staff and other guests on the island, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. Security on the island was limited. Most of the villas were far apart, and few had surveillance cameras. The Monroe villa, perched alone on the cliffside, had no coverage. Investigators began a search of the surrounding area. The dense jungle behind the villa proved challenging. Paths were overgrown and twisted unpredictably. Dogs were brought in, but the humidity and terrain made scent tracking nearly impossible. Drones scanned the cliffs and the jungle canopy, while divers checked the waters below in case the couple had fallen or attempted to swim and drowned. It wasn't long before locals began talking. Some remembered hearing something strange on Saturday night. Loud voices, possibly arguing, followed by what they described as thunder-like sounds. At first, they assumed it was just echoes from a storm or rough waves hitting the rocks. But now, those noises took on a darker tone. Were they screams? Gunshots? Something else entirely. As the days passed with no leads, the case attracted media attention back in the United States. Headlines called it the Honeymoon Mystery. Photos of Emily and Zachary, smiling, sun-kissed, blissful, were splashed across news segments. Reporters questioned the safety of private resorts in remote areas. Travel blogs speculated on possible explanations: a tragic accident, a kidnapping, foul play. Police explored every theory. One possibility was that the couple had gone on a hike and gotten lost. The island was full of trails, some of them undocumented, but search teams found no trace of them, no dropped items, no footprints, no torn clothing. Another theory was that they had fallen from the cliffs, but the rocks below were carefully scanned, and there was no evidence, no broken branches, no drag marks, no bodies. There was also the idea of a voluntary disappearance. Had they staged their vanishing to start over somewhere else? But everything in the villa contradicted that idea. They hadn't taken money, identification, or clothes. Their last social media posts showed a couple deeply happy, with no indication of distress or plans to run away. As the investigation stalled, pressure mounted on the local authorities. Emily and Zachary's families flew to the island, desperate for answers. The resort, once praised for its seclusion, now faced harsh criticism for its lack of emergency procedures. A private investigator was hired, and within a week, he made a discovery that changed everything. A tourist, unaware of the growing case, had been flying a drone near the cliffs for fun. When asked for any footage he might have captured, he handed over the files without hesitation. What investigators found in those videos shifted the focus of the case entirely. The footage, though blurry, showed two people, matching the Monroe's descriptions, walking near the jungle's edge late at night. A third figure emerged from the trees. There was a scuffle, sudden movement, and then all three vanished into the brush. The timestamp matched the last known hours of Emily and Zachary's lives. Now, this wasn't just a missing persons case. It was something far worse. The drone footage gave the investigation a critical turning point. Though the video was far from clear, it captured something unmistakable: danger. The grainy clip, time-stamped just after 11 p.m. on Saturday night, showed two figures walking hand-in-hand near the edge of the jungle, illuminated only by moonlight. Investigators believed it was Emily and Zachary. Then suddenly a third figure appeared, emerging from the trees behind them. There was a quick flash of motion. One of the figures collapsed. The other turned to run. Then the trees swallowed them all. The footage stunned the public and confirmed what many had feared. This was not an accident. This was a crime. A full-scale manhunt was launched on Isla Paraíso. Local police, joined by federal investigators, began combing the jungle. More drones were deployed, and thermal imaging was used at night. The terrain was difficult. Thick underbrush, steep inclines, and tangled roots made movement slow. The heat was oppressive. Mosquitoes and biting insects swarmed, yet the search continued, relentless and focused. About a mile inland from the Monroe Villa, hidden beneath a canopy of twisted fig trees, a small makeshift campsite was discovered. It looked hastily constructed, just a tarp stretched over branches, a circle of stones used as a fire pit, and scattered trash. But more alarming were the items investigators found lying around. A length of rope, a stained piece of canvas, torn fabric that appeared to match a shirt Emily had worn earlier in the week. There were also dark, rusty spots on the ground. Samples confirmed it was blood. DNA testing would later match it to Zachary. Nearby, buried under a thin layer of leaves and dirt, investigators found a single wedding ring. Forensics teams photographed everything. Investigators now believed the attacker had been living off-grid on the island, stalking the couple and watching from the jungle. How long had he been there? How many other people had he observed without being noticed? Search efforts intensified. Locals were questioned again. Some admitted that a man had been seen from time to time in the jungle, dirty, thin, and silent, always watching from a distance. They called him El Fantasma, the ghost. A former tour guide named Javier Rojas. Once charming and knowledgeable, Rojas had been fired from his job years earlier after a string of complaints from female tourists, including unwanted advances and aggressive behavior. Since then, he had disappeared from regular society, choosing to live alone deep within the forested interior of the island. It wasn't until 3 days after the discovery of the campsite that they found him. An officer spotted movement in the trees and followed the sound until he came upon a wooden platform built into the branches of a massive tree. It was primitive but carefully constructed. Inside were jugs of water, empty cans, a lantern, and several notebooks. And hiding behind a tangle of netting and vines was Javier Rojas. He was arrested without resistance. Thin, sunburned, and with sunken eyes, he offered no explanation. He refused to speak to officers or answer any questions. Instead, he stared blankly ahead, as though disconnected from reality. But what they found in his belongings spoke volumes. The notebooks were filled with drawings, dozens of them. Pages upon pages of crude but disturbing sketches of couples. Most showed people lying in bed, walking on the beach, or sitting on patios. But others were more unsettling. People tied up, being dragged through trees, or lying motionless in pools of ink. There were maps too, hand-drawn diagrams of the resort, the villas, and the trails. Each villa was marked with notes, symbols, and initials. The Monroe Villa had its own page, detailed notes on arrival dates, what they wore, what times they swam, when they ate. Rojas had been watching them from the moment they stepped off the boat. Still, without a confession or bodies, the case remained incomplete. Authorities needed more proof, more answers. They returned to his treehouse with forensic teams and conducted another sweep. That when they made the most important discovery yet. A small flash drive taped to the underside of a loose wooden plank. It was labeled only with one word: truth. Back at the station, investigators accessed the files. What they saw would confirm their worst fears. The flash drive contained video clips, several of them, time-stamped over the span of a week. The footage had been taken from a hidden wildlife camera, the kind used to track animals at night, but Rojas had pointed it at the Monroe Villa. The camera showed the couple during their most private moments, sitting by the pool, laughing, eating, even sleeping. He had watched everything. The final clip was the most haunting. It showed Rojas creeping toward the villa just before midnight, holding something long in his hand. He slipped inside the door and disappeared from view. Minutes later, the camera caught movement again, Zachary being dragged, unconscious, across the grass and into the trees. That was the last time either of them was seen alive. With this evidence, authorities now had enough to charge Javier Rojas with murder. But the story wasn't over, because still, no bodies had been found. And without them, there were still questions lingering in the shadows of Isla Paraíso. The arrest of Javier Rojas sent shockwaves through the island and beyond. The once idyllic image of Isla Paraíso as a private paradise shattered overnight. News of the deranged man living in the jungle stalking honeymooners became headline material around the world. Tourists canceled their reservations. Travel warnings were issued. The island's luxury image was replaced by one of horror and unanswered questions. Though investigators now had Javier Rojas in custody, the case remained incomplete. Emily and Zachary Monroe were still missing, and without their bodies, prosecutors faced an uphill battle. A murder conviction without physical remains is always more difficult. The defense could argue that the couple had fled or been kidnapped by someone else. Even with the flash drive footage, they needed more. Forensic teams returned to the jungle, this time with cadaver dogs and environmental experts. They expanded the search perimeter around the area where Zachary S. blood and the wedding ring had been found. But the terrain was unforgiving. Vines twisted through the underbrush. Insects clouded the air. Heavy rain flooded low-lying areas and washed away traces of potential evidence. They found more blood in scattered spots. Small personal items likely belonging to Emily, a broken bracelet, a torn sandal, but no sign of the bodies. Divers were called in again, focusing on coves and underwater caves near the cliffs. Isla Paraíso's waters were beautiful, but deceptively treacherous. Jagged rocks formed hidden pockets where currents twisted unpredictably. After several days of searching, they discovered something weighted down with stones about 20 feet below the surface. It was a suitcase. The zipper had been sealed with wire. Inside, they found a tangle of soaked, muddied clothing. A white dress torn at the hem. A pair of hiking shorts. A makeup bag with Emily's initials. Wrapped tightly in a towel was her engagement ring, tucked inside a jewelry pouch. It had been an attempt to hide the evidence, but it only deepened the confirmation that this was not just a disappearance. It was a brutal cover-up. Back on land, investigators examined the contents of the flash drive again. One clip had corrupted video but still retained its audio track. The sounds were faint at first. Crickets, rustling leaves, footsteps. Then a woman's voice, panicked, breathing hard, running, twigs breaking underfoot. Then a sharp, sudden crash. The rest of the recording was static. Every new piece of evidence painted a clearer, darker picture. Prosecutors compiled it all, video, DNA, personal items, and began building the case. Rojas continued to refuse to speak. His court-appointed attorney claimed he was mentally unstable and not competent to stand trial. He sat through interrogations in silence, often staring at the wall for hours. Psychiatrists were brought in to assess his condition. Their reports described him as paranoid, delusional, and likely suffering from untreated psychosis, worsened by isolation and long-term malnourishment. But they also noted a chilling level of awareness in how he had planned and executed his actions. He had chosen the Monroes deliberately. He had stalked them with precision. He had taken steps to avoid detection. The trial was scheduled to begin in the capital, and the Monroes' families traveled to attend. They were devastated, but determined to see justice done. The courtroom was filled with reporters. The public wanted answers. During pre-trial hearings, the prosecution presented their evidence. The judge agreed there was enough to move forward with charges: 2 counts of murder, kidnapping, unlawful surveillance, and destruction of evidence. Then, just days before the trial, the investigation took another turn. Authorities conducted one final sweep of Rojas's hideout, hoping to locate the missing bodies. They searched beyond the usual perimeter and stumbled upon a narrow cave entrance half hidden by ferns and moss. Inside was a small chamber, dry despite the surrounding humidity. At the far end lay bones, scattered, partially buried in the soil. Forensic analysis confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Zachary Monroe. A cracked skull and broken ribs told the story of a violent death. Dental records and a DNA match left no room for doubt. Emily, however, was still missing. With the new evidence, the case was stronger than ever. But it left one horrifying question unanswered. What happened to Emily? Some investigators believed she may have survived for a short time after the attack, possibly injured and hiding in the jungle. Others believed her body had been hidden in an area not yet discovered, perhaps in one of the underwater caves beyond reach. A few even entertained darker possibilities, that she had been kept alive for days before being killed, her remains destroyed or buried in an undisclosed location. In court, Javier Rojas remained emotionless. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But justice, while served in the eyes of the law, offered little peace. Emily's body was never recovered. Her parents returned home with only a small box of belongings recovered from the villa. Zachary was laid to rest in Charleston, in a quiet cemetery beneath a magnolia tree. The two had arrived in paradise with dreams of a life just beginning. Instead, they became a haunting reminder that even the most beautiful places can hide unimaginable horrors. The conviction of Javier Rojas brought closure in the eyes of the law, but it did little to soothe the grief of those left behind. Emily Monroe's body was never recovered, and the absence of a final resting place kept a door open that many wished could be closed. Her parents, Karen and Thomas, returned to South Carolina after the trial, burdened with both grief and unanswered questions. They held a memorial service using photos, candles, and handwritten letters. The chapel was filled with friends, family, and former students of Emily's who remembered her as a kind, gentle spirit who believed in love and the goodness of people. That faith, tragically, had met a darkness no one had expected. Zachary S. family chose to bury him in the town where he and Emily had planned to settle after their honeymoon. His funeral drew hundreds, including former co-workers, childhood friends, and strangers who had followed the story. Many mourners left seashells on his grave, a quiet tribute to the beach where his last days were spent. The pain of his loss was visible in every face. What was meant to be a beginning had ended in the most unimaginable way. In the months following the trial, Isla Paraíso changed. Tourism plummeted. The once luxurious villas that had promised privacy and peace now stood mostly empty. The resort company rebranded, attempting to distance itself from the tragedy, but the name had already become synonymous with fear. Local officials pledged to improve security, add surveillance, and vet all island employees with more scrutiny. But the damage was done. A documentary crew visited the island to film a special on the case. Interviews with law enforcement, locals, and members of both families painted a fuller picture of how such horror could unfold in such a tranquil setting. The footage was haunting. Drones sweeping over abandoned trails, the jungle reclaiming the campsite where Rojas had hidden, the now empty Monroe Villa with its ocean view, once so full of hope, now heavy with memory. The documentary aired under the title Paradise Lost, The Monroe Honeymoon Murders, and it drew millions of viewers. Online forums buzzed with theories. Some speculated Emily had escaped and was living in hiding. Others, more grim, believed she had been buried in one of the island's countless unsearched caverns, or even thrown into the sea, where the tides had long since claimed her. A few conspiracy theories even suggested Rojas hadn't acted alone, that someone within the resort had helped him knowingly or not. But no evidence ever supported these claims. One of the most disturbing discoveries came months after the trial. when authorities revisited the flash drive found beneath Rojas's treehouse. Digital forensic experts managed to recover deleted files that hadn't been visible during the initial investigation. Among them were more surveillance clips, older ones, showing other couples who had stayed at the resort months prior to the Monroe case. None had been harmed, but the implications were chilling. Javier Rojas had been watching guests for far longer than anyone thought. Emily and Zachary had simply been the couple he chose to act upon. It suggested a pattern, a progression from obsession to action, and it raised the unsettling possibility that he may have been planning to strike again. The discovery pushed authorities to re-examine unsolved cases from nearby islands and coastal towns. Though nothing was definitively linked to Rojas, his mental deterioration, combined with a deep knowledge of the terrain and years spent in solitude, made him an unpredictable and dangerous figure. In prison, he continued to say nothing. He was placed under psychiatric observation, where he remained silent, eyes often fixed on the sky through the narrow bars of his cell. Years passed, but the story never truly faded. Each anniversary brought articles, tributes, and quiet vigils. Emily's family established a foundation in her name, providing travel safety education for young women and couples. They advocated for stronger international laws on resort safety and worked to ensure better oversight of isolated tourist destinations. Despite the horror, something meaningful emerged from the tragedy. Travelers became more cautious. Resort companies changed their policies, and the Monroe name became a symbol, not just of a crime, but of the love that was stolen, the lives that were cut short, and the legacy that endured. To this day, visitors occasionally leave flowers or shells at the edge of the cliffs where the Monroe villa once stood, now abandoned and slowly crumbling. The ocean below continues to crash against the rocks, indifferent and eternal. And somewhere in the breeze it said you can still feel something lingering, a sadness, a whisper of love lost too soon, a reminder that even the most perfect dream can become a nightmare in the blink of an eye.